Hi, and welcome. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about some serious woo while I get the kids' room ready for painting and do a little bit of painting. We're remodeling this room a bit so they both have some space to themselves. We're getting a different bed in here also. And having had opened these doors, I had this glimpse of the future and thinking like when kids move out, we can have this huge master bedroom suite because this is a railroad apartment. All the rooms are connected. And so we're always walking through the kids' room and the little office area to get through the bedroom. And then I had another thought, which is that in New York City, nobody ever moves out. And people live multi-generationally on top of each other like all of our neighbors, and how that's really common for people not to move out at that standard age of 18 through like early 20s because it's so unaffordable that people just end up living together indefinitely. So just a thought about that. In this way, New York is very similar to where I grew up in the Soviet Union in Kiev, Ukraine, where luckily we didn't live with our grandparents, but many of my friends, most of my friends, did live with their parents and their grandparents, which is good for the fact that you get support, but it's not good for people who don't get along super well with their family. And I feel like in my family, it was definitely a lot of tension if people were too close too often. And it probably continues to be this way. Like, I'll always be welcome at my home, but it does create conflicts if it's more than a few hours here and there or a day. So, just something I was thinking about as I had these doors open and seeing this space, like the potential of the space as one huge bedroom, but then just also thinking about the limitations of New York. And I'm not even saying that we are gonna like stay here forever because this is rented property and who knows what's gonna happen in the future. But to get into the topic of today's monologue, it's going to be about how and why I got into astrology and other like ancestral healing and things like that. Well, you may notice that I release my episodes at like seemingly random times and dates, and that's because I'm using the principle of electional astrology. And what that is finding an opportune time that is suited for releasing something, which means that there are some components like having the moon be in good condition, having the ruler of the ascendant be in good condition, to have the venture, which is the release of the episode, to do well. And that is just one aspect of astrology. There's all different kinds. There's natal astrology, which is obviously looking at somebody's chart and kind of reading the strongest archetypes that they're going to be influenced by, and even making some predictions about future events and things like that. What am I doing here? I think I'm watching Dive Talk and I'm just zoning out there. I'm not a diver. I don't plan to be a diver ever, but the banter between those two guys, I just find it really nice. Gus and Woody of Dive Talk, highly recommend. Okay, so how and why did I get into astrology, and who cares really? Well, it's helped me a lot to understand myself, understand lineage, familial patterns, and things like that. And so I think that what happened was something in 2020, which was partially due to lockdowns, and you will see around 10 minutes of this video. I will be showing some photos of what we did during 2020, which was well, in the initial phase, everything got shut down and even the playgrounds. So I started taking my kids to a cemetery because that was the only like green open space that we could walk to. I could have taken a subway to a park because the parks were not closed, but anything with a playground was closed. And sometimes it was kind of ambiguous, like, is this a park or is this a playground or is this playground part of the park? But there was like caution tape and like locks on the gates. And even just going out to say, like, take a walk, like I would take them I think my oldest one was 3 and the baby was a baby, like pretty much newborn at that point or just like a few months. So I would take them out and people would be like in the laundromat doing laundry because that's essential business, and they would tell me to take my kids home and to go home. And so I know that no matter what, they needed to be outside. So I try to find green spaces where we could go. And we found one of the cemeteries and we go there daily. And then everyone else did that too. Like a lot of people from the neighborhood would walk there, jog there, have picnics there. And so they closed that one down. And that one was kind of on the main road there. So it was like a big Catholic cemetery with like big open pathways. So it was really conducive to people strolling through it. And they closed that one down because they specifically didn't want people in there that had like no business being there. So I found another cemetery that was a bit off the beaten path. It was enormous, and it was an old Jewish cemetery called Mount Zion. Because the cemetery was so old, it had a lot of very different parts to it that felt like almost their own ecosystems in terms of what was growing there. We'd see different kinds of animals. For example, there were lizards that were an invasive species that somehow ended up there. So when the weather warmed up, these lizards came out and were absolutely everywhere. And that's not something you see in New York, where the kids don't really get a chance to like chase frogs or catch tadpoles or whatever. So this was a really rich experience. And it's not lost on me how controversial this idea may seem, both from the perspective of exposing children to an environment like that, or the idea that it's disrespectful to be in a place where you don't really have any business of being, and being disrespectful to the deceased and the families of the deceased. But given the circumstances, I decided that it was worth for everybody to get some fresh air in this way rather than trying to leave the city altogether where we didn't even really have any options for doing that. There was also a coyote that was living there, which I kept thinking was like somebody walking their German Shepherd, because I would see like a tail or like just something like between the stones once in a while. And then one day I saw it head on, and it was like this really skittish coyote. And I know there's like other sightings of them in the city, but I thought that was kind of ominous also. And sometimes this part's a bit morbid, but sometimes my kid would play with this train set that was left for another child at the plot. And this child, like, I actually looked up this boy's name and I found a lot of information about him. and that was written by his family, and I actually like reached out to their family, and I thanked them for sharing his story, and I shared that we would visit his stone frequently and talk about him with my kids. And I did actually connect with the mom and had a conversation with her briefly, and she didn't seem to think there was anything strange about me reaching out to her. So that was really positive, I thought. My son learned to ride a bike there when he was 3.5. You'll see some of that footage there. By the way, if you're interested in having a child ride a bike early, if they have a balance bike to practice with from ages 1.5 or 2, by the time they're 3.5, they'll be able to get on a bike and just start pedaling pretty much right away. And there's really weird thing happened where we found all these toys. You'll see them in a minute, but somebody dumped a bunch of toys behind a fence. So we would go and pull these toys out, and my son would play with them, and then we would put them back. So it just felt like the cemetery had been such a welcoming place after the hostility of people on the street. Like, for example, a woman who felt the need to come over to my side of the street just to say that I wasn't wearing a mask, where we were the only two people within maybe 2 blocks. There was palpable tension and fear in the city. This is one of the lizards. Also, I'd picked chives there that were like a wild chive that was edible.
Yeah, what's it taste like? Is it good? Is that the right one?
Piccole, piccole.
Do you like it?
Monali cook
All right, I want to get in. Oh no, I can't get in. All right, I'll wait. I can get in? Okay. Oh no. So that was our spring slash summer 2020. And then I think they started to open the playgrounds, but not until the fall. Or maybe it was summer. I don't remember, but it was well into summer, if it was summer, that things started to open, like playgrounds. And I remember that we decided to go to a park. It was like a large field that had a track connected to a playground, and people had already been going there for a few months, despite it technically being closed. But because it was one of those ambiguous ones that was like, is this a park or is this a playground? And there was a caution tape, but there wasn't any place you could really lock it. So we had been going there a little bit here and there, and there were also like other like kids and teenagers there. And then the day before the parks and playgrounds officially were to be open, we said, okay, like that's close enough. We could just go. It was literally the next day that officially things were going to be open. And we went to this one playground, and somebody called the cops on us, and the cops came and said, like, you can't be in here. And this is a story I heard from other parents who tried to do similar things, like find green places for their kids to play, that they were told, like, oh, your parents are going to get a big fine, or like your parents are going to be taken to jail. Mind you, we didn't have a car at this point, so getting out of the city would have required a train ride. There were people on local social media groups complaining that some individuals weren't following the rules and that people would still go to the park to exercise, like to use the monkey bars or something like that, and how unfair it was to everybody else. It was just a mess. I really thought it was a mess. I really thought that it's a priority for kids to go outside, so that's how we ended up at the cemetery. Mount Zion is also the home of the monument and burial site of a lot of the women who perished in the Shirtwaist Triangle Fire of 1911. During this fire, 123 women and girls, as well as 23 men, perished because the stairwell and the doors out were locked to prevent workers from coming out on breaks before it was like scheduled. And this tragic event led to a lot of regulations that somewhat improved conditions in factories like that. It was like a great lesson in history too. There was a plot of just newborns that was really reminiscent of how child mortality was um, like a ever-present fear and was just a reality. Recently, I read an article about the fact that photography became so widely used because of that mortality rate and things like the wars, where people really didn't know if they were going to have that husband or that baby the next year. So people flock to photography studios despite the expense just to capture an image of somebody that might not be there for the long term. And photography was a lot more accessible to people than having a portrait, and everybody was now able to capture those moments with their loved ones. As somebody who spent countless hours in the darkroom watching those ghostly images come into form on photo paper, I really resonate with this idea, with the concept of freezing time and being able to look back on it. So, how does this tie into starting to learn astrology or getting into ancestral healing? I'm not exactly sure, but I know that this was a pivotal few months. Perhaps I shouldn't be eating those chives that grew there or something. I don't know. But for some reason, I just acquired the desire for more in depth knowledge about the spiritual worlds and things that maybe don't appear to us on the surface, than just looking for answers to questions like I was really struggling with. I've never been diagnosed with ADHD, but like tendencies that align with that diagnosis. I was really struggling to just maintain basic tasks. Even just getting the kids out, like I promised myself that I would take them outside daily, and even that was a struggle. Sometimes I couldn't get out until late in the evening and just procrastinating constantly, having like the house be in complete mess. And so I just had this desire to figure out why I couldn't function. And I know that there were a lot of things going on in 2020 that lots of people couldn't function, but this was like a lifelong struggle that I had. And on a Reddit forum, just completely incidentally, I ran across somebody suggesting the 7 Hermetic principles for dealing with their ADHD. And that seemed like really out there because the 7 Hermetic principles have absolutely nothing to do with ADHD at all. Like, it's not something that can help you. And but something happened once I read the 7 Hermetic principles, where it just took me on this journey that from that moment on, I feel like I entered through a gate of um, some kind of portal to having all of these things accessible to me, like I started learning astrology because a video just popped up on YouTube, and it felt like I wasn't learning it. It felt like I was remembering a different language. And I think that is the genesis, and then everything else kind of fell into place because I started to understand certain things about myself and other members of my family. And then the next thing would just kind of appear. It's like when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And it led me on into this path. At this time, my friend set me up with a gig cleaning vacant apartments in the building that she managed because so many people had left the city, and I had so much time to listen to esoteric podcasts while I cleaned. I remember coming across an episode of the Astrology Podcast, which is hosted by Chris Brennan, and people were talking about the astrology. They were like intellectual looking and sounding people, and they were so serious about it. And I remember being like, but this is but it didn't make sense how such smart seeming people would be talking about something that had no basis in reality. And I was one of those people who had no interest in astrology, didn't think it was real, didn't think it had anything to do with anything important, and here we are. I feel less like I discovered astrology, but more like it discovered me. I don't even know what the appeal was for watching these episodes because I really didn't understand anything they were saying. And then I just started with the basics, like what is the meaning of these planets? And like what is their essential archetype? Where do they belong? Where do they rule? Where is their home? Which sign? Where do they like being? Where do they not like being? And what does that mean? Maybe it appealed to me because of my exposure to Greek mythology at a young age. It just unraveled for me. I wasn't even learning, it felt like I was remembering because it's actually quite complicated to learn astrology. And the type of astrology I guess that I'm the most exposed to is Hellenistic astrology, which is very old, which is what Chris Brennan teaches and discusses in his podcast. And obviously, he discusses absolutely everything because it's just things about the in general. It's called mundane astrology, which is like things that are happening in the world and how they correlate to things that are happening in the sky given the archetypes. And then there's like a whole discussion about fate versus free will, and if these things are actually lining up to be predictive, like what does that mean for our destiny and sense of free will. And I find those topics quite enjoyable to think about, and I was able to find some patterns in my own chart which had to do with, like, for example, I'm Cancer Sun and Rising, and my grandmother has a Cancer stellium, which is a large amount of planets in the zodiac sign of Cancer. So it made sense to me why we would have this connection, unlike other members of the family, and how we have, for example, Chiron in the same sign. So it showed me all of these different places where like family trauma was visible to me for the first time. And this is something I struggled with since having kids because I haven't always been like the happiest child or the happiest person. So it was important to me to deal with my own inner demons enough to be a decent parent. And like, I'm not trying to win any awards or anything, but astrology really helped to bring light to a lot of like subconscious patterning, and also like why I struggle with certain things. And it all of a sudden, it didn't feel random, and that like existentialness of going through your life without rhyme or reason fell away. And I was actually able to find more peace and self acceptance. As I grew in my own knowledge, I've sort of found a niche for myself, which is focused around the lunar nodes. Being somebody who was born during an active eclipse, I can see how that energy has colored my life in the way that it's been, like with a lot of up and downs and very unpredictable. And I enjoy telling other people about their node placements and how those energies manifest, the type of challenges that they present, and how to best deal with them, because they're almost like a seesaw. And we tend to overemphasize one side of the equation to the detriment of the other. Okay, at the end here, we have the room finished up with the new furniture. Everybody has a new up area and a down area to hang out in.